brain controls everything. Dr. Melillo's work is based around balancing the brain. And he works with people that are a bit neurodiverse, autism, ADHD. It can help with a whole range of things associated with hemispheric imbalance. One hemisphere might be more dominant and one hemisphere might not be, and there's this imbalance in the brain. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Reflecting Health podcast. My name's Jackie, I'll be your host. Today I really wanted to do a bit of a dive into Dr. Robert Melillo's work. So he has created this program called Brain Balancing, and he works with people that are a bit neurodiverse, so populations with autism, ADHD, anything sort of dyslexia, bipolar, things like that. And he essentially does exercises to balance the brain. Now, this all kind of starts when we're babies, actually in the womb, and then when we're born. Our brain is developing at a really rapid rate during this early development. So if there's anything in the womb or anything as babies that impacts this development, it can have lifelong effects down the track. So for example, in our brainstem, that's the most primitive part of the brain and is responsible for a lot of our unconscious processes in our bodies. And when we're born, we have these things called primitive reflexes, and they originate in the brainstem in the brain. And these reflexes, they essentially do, they're involved in sort of these movements that help us grow and sort of sustain life. For example, there's a rooting and sucking reflex. So if there's a tactile, so touch stimulation to the cheek, the reflex is that the baby will turn its head towards that stimulation and then sort of pucker the lips, getting ready to breastfeed, essentially, so that it's a natural reaction as a baby. Now, as the baby grows, that reflex is meant to be integrated. So by the time they get a little bit older, around 1 year old, I can't remember the exact time that one's meant to be integrated. The reflex is meant to integrate so that when you have stimulation to the cheek, you don't have an automatic reaction where your lips will pucker, your mouth will move, or you'll turn your neck towards the side of that stimulation. There are other ones too. There's like a spinal galant. Now that helps with birthing. It also helps with learning how to crawl and roll and different things like that. There's other ones too associated with neck movement, and that will sort of straighten or bend the limbs. There's a whole bunch of them that do different things that help us learn to move and do a lot of movements associated with survival as babies. And like I said, they originate in the brain stem. So if there's anything that impacts early development, and this could be trauma, it could be toxins, it could be a lack of kind of minerals in the mother, or something that's just impacting that development so it's not happening as it should, then it could be just any sort of range of things, then that will impact the development of these reflexes and the integration of these reflexes. So what can happen is they might be retained past the point that they should be integrated, and that can impact our conscious movement patterns. You know, we're trying to do a conscious movement, but then these reflexes sort of take over. One really key one is one in the foot, where if there's stimulation to the outside of the foot, the Babinski reflex is that the foot would extend and the toes will extend. Now you can see how having that reflex might impact walking, because every time you put your foot down, rather than pushing down and pushing off to walk, the toes are coming up and the foot's coming up, and it's really impacting somebody's gait and ability to walk. Also, not having these reflexes integrated impacts the development of the brain further up. So as we're sort of growing through the first year of life, the development sort of starts a bit lower down. And then because this develops, it's sort of like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. If you haven't fully completed step 1, Step 2 is sort of starting on the back foot and not able to properly kind of develop. You sort of need to have each developmental stage complete before the next one can sort of properly start and complete, and then continue on these sort of developmental steps in the brain as we're babies. So anything that sort of impacts a single step in that development is going to impact the following steps after it. And this can impact hemispheric development. So typically in the first 3 years of life, the right hemisphere is going through most of the growth, most of the sort of growing and developing and getting the right hemisphere online. And that's sort of more your big picture thinking. You might have heard people talk about like right brain people, left brain people. So right brain is like that creative sort of aspect, sort of your non-verbal communication. That's your big picture thinking. That's all kind of right hemisphere. Left hemisphere is that logical, analytical, focused mind. Right brain, big picture, creative, that kind of brain. And so that one's developing in the first 3 years of life. So any kind of impact to development in the first 3 years can impact that right brain development, and it can cause the left brain to come online too early. So sometimes you might have kids that are early talkers, and that might even be, and usually it's like, oh yay, they're talking early, and it might be perceived as a really good thing, but sometimes it's not such a good thing because it means that the right brain hasn't properly developed and the left brain's come online too early and could be too dominant, and the right brain isn't sort of properly developed and dominant enough. So what can happen is you end up with this, one hemisphere might be more dominant and one hemisphere might not be, and there's this imbalance in the brain, and that can kind of have flow-on effects and cause issues down the sort of chain of development as well. So for example, if our left brain is more dominant, it means we're more logical, we're more analytical. There could be some amazing genius skills associated with that, but there might also be a lot of difficulties as well associated with the right brain not being properly developed and having trouble with some of the right brain skills. And this is commonly seen in things like ADHD and autism, which are more left brain associated things. So if somebody's very, very highly developed in the left brain, and you see this all the time in autism, they're absolute geniuses with some things, you know, the memory is sharp and remember anything and do the most amazing kind of math skills and calculations really young, and it's absolutely incredible what some of these people can do. But then often they're also faced with a lot of challenges that are associated with the right brain not being developed and not being online enough too. So a lot of those right brain skills might be very difficult, like social skills and big picture skills and things like that. There could be a bit more of a fixation on little things and sort of that sort of focused energy, which is a left brain skill. On the other side, if sometimes we can have the right brain overdeveloped and the left brain not come online too much too. Now the right brain is, like I said, more that big picture social stuff, but sometimes you might have a kid that doesn't want to talk to anyone and they might be right brain dominant, but it might be that they're overly sensitive to people and they're really shy and they're really sensitive to things like rejection or what people might think of them. Whereas someone who's left brain dominant, they might not be very verbal because they're not really connecting with people. So you might see a similar presentation sometimes, but they might have very different origins as to why these sort of things are showing in people. So if you're a little bit more dominant on the right side, you might have trouble with organization and analytical skills. You might even be a little bit more prone to things like depression and anxiety and things like that. It doesn't mean that a left brain person can't have those things. You just might be a little bit more prone to it if you're right brain dominant. There's certainly those things associated with left brain dominance too. So yeah, you can definitely be dominant in either side. Now, right brain dominance tends to be more associated with things like dyslexia or bipolar. and then left brain dominance with more autism traits, ADHD, schizophrenia too. So it could be either side of that spectrum could show these kind of traits and issues. Now, I'm a little bit more right brain dominant and a little bit less left brain dominant. So things like those focused, sort of detail-oriented tasks, I find a little bit more difficult, but then big picture thinking is a lot easier for me. And everybody's probably sits in a little bit in either camp. Now, Dr. Melillo's work is based around balancing the brain. Now, he believes that if we can get congruence in the brain, so if we can get the brain balanced, if we can get the less dominant side working a little bit more and sort of settle down the more dominant side, get them a little bit more even, then the communication between the hemispheres is going to be better, the congruence in the brain is going to be better, and it's going to be much more powerful and able to do a lot more things overall if we've got this balance of left and right, because we need both. They're both important. They both have very important skills. And if one side is much, much more dominant, it can really restrict us in other areas. So what you can do is development is sort of triggered by stimulation. So we've got this world out here. And if we're stimulating our senses during early development, so babies, we're just exploring, we're feeling things, we're trying things out, and we're getting all of this beautiful stimulation to our senses. So if we're not getting that stimulation, then that can really restrict our development. So the techniques are essentially around stimulating the different sort of senses. So you might wear glasses that block a particular hemisphere so that you're stimulating just one side of your vision, and then you're getting visual input. You might use flashing lights on one corner or one side to kind of stimulate visual input again. Another technique is to use a headphone on one ear only or an earplug on the other, so that you're only getting sort of hearing stimulation to one side, and that's just activating the hemisphere that is less dominant. And you can do it with smell too. You can do single nostril breathing, so you can block one nostril and do breathing out of one nostril. You can also do things like stimulate the sense of smell with different smells. So we've got sweet smells, typically are registered in the left side brain. So if you want to stimulate the left brain, stimulating the left nostril with sweet smells, and even trying to guess what smells are. So doing a bit of a random smell test can be good. Strong smells for the right brain, so stimulate right nostril, right brain with really strong smells, and that can help get that online as well. You can do other things like tactile stimulation, so touch to one side of the body to stimulate the opposite hemisphere. So you can just do that with normal touch. You can do that with objects and things to stimulate that just down your body, on your skin, arm, leg, trunk, anywhere. You can also use things like TENS. So TENS is sort of an electrical stimulation that you can pop on, and that can give you some stimulation into the body too. There's proprioceptive exercises you can do. So proprioception is essentially knowing where your body is in space without looking at it. And that's really important for your balance and just sort of knowing where your joints are and not your coordination. Coordination's more when you can see the task, but knowing where your joints are. So there's different exercises that we can stimulate the proprioception as well. And yeah, there's different music playlists you can get that are more focused on one hemisphere. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can stimulate one side compared to the other. It's really good to kind of do multiple things to get stimulation to multiple brain areas to try and get that brain online. There's also exercises you can do to integrate the primitive reflexes. So the primitive reflexes get integrated basically when you stimulate it lots and lots and lots. So you can, if we're going to do stimulating the one that we talked about at the start, the root and suck reflex, we could touch the face and we can make that sort of start. And then if we're doing that consistently every day, that's going to start to integrate, and we get some really good outcomes if we pair that with hemispheric exercises too. So it can help with a whole range of things associated with hemispheric imbalance. I mean, the brain controls everything. The brain controls our immune function, our gut function. It controls how much tone is in the muscles. So a lot of people have got one side of their body that's stronger than the other, or one side of the body that gets all the injuries and one side that doesn't. I know I'm certainly in that camp. So that can help with, you know, a twisting of the body more to one side. It can help with vision problems, ability to track things. It can help with depression, anxiety symptoms associated with a dominant hemisphere. It can help with so many different things that could have their roots back in early development, in primitive reflex non-integration, and in hemispheric imbalance. I know that was a lot of information, but I just wanted to give everybody a big overview of Dr. Melillo's work. I find it fascinating. I've been using it myself and I found it really amazing. So I hope you found this session helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.